Excellent. Okay, so we're on time. My name is Leigh-Ann. I am a recovering attorney who found her way into tech just about a decade ago. And my body of work really explores how tech and innovation can intersect to really accelerate equity opportunity. I've launched and led a series of social impact projects that have unlocked about $75 million worth of capital to communities, to organizations, to individuals. And I currently lead the Innovation Authority in Miami. So I flew up here just to have a conversation with you all, as well as to attend Venture Atlanta. The Innovation Authority is a relatively new type of organization. Essentially what we do is we're an independent nonprofit that receives government grants to invest in private startups. That actually hasn't been done, to my knowledge, at the county or municipal level, but often happens at the federal level. So we're trying to invest in startups from around the world who have technology and innovation solutions that improve quality of life. We're really concerned with public innovation, how innovation can be used to address public challenges. I also advise and I consult. I'm a founder, and there's some other things in there. But what you should know about me is I'm very curious. I'm curious about new advances in technology, but most importantly, how new technologies and innovation will impact the way that we live. A lot of my work has been around kind of reframing who we consider to be innovators, how we determine where innovation comes from, and thinking not about innovation just as a process, as we'll talk about a little bit today, but more about the culture of innovation and how that might, when left unaddressed, actually exacerbate some of the societal gaps in equity, access, and opportunity that exist. And so what we're going to do today, and does everybody have a cell phone? Yes? If you guys saw someone with a laptop, which is fine too, you're allowed to use your cell phones. You're allowed to use your cell phones not to text, but to participate. I think for those that just came in, my name is Leigh-Ann Buchanan, president and CEO at the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority. I would love for this to be an interactive conversation. There's still 2 rows at the front if you're at the back and want to come through, but I'm happy to jump off of the stage and come right into the crowd. But we're going to be talking a little bit about AI, less about how AI can make your team more resilient, which was kind of the original framing, but more about a couple of different perspective shifts that we can make to rethink the power of AI and what it could mean in our communities, in our organizations, as leaders, and society in general. And so today we're going to be using a tool called Menti. I'll do a little bit of a test run to make sure it works. But we're also going to try, depending on the time, to have you talk to each other, to talk back, and make this as much of a conversation and less of a chat. So these are some just headlines. I think that if you live under a rock, then you probably haven't heard of AI, but by show of hands, everybody knows what AI is, right? You've heard of it? My dad doesn't have the internet, and he doesn't have a cell phone, and he doesn't really know about AI. He's like the one person in my life that doesn't know anything about AI. But what we're going to talk about is we're not going to go through the mechanics of machine learning. I'll leave that for the experts. We're going to talk about the social and cultural aspects of AI. So roadmap for our time today, I want to talk a little bit about norms and expectations. We're going to do some exploration and make it interactive, and then I'll give you a couple of tools. If you are a leader of an organization, if you teach students, if you're just curious, these tools will help you just develop a mental model for how you can think about AI a little bit differently. Does that sound like a good plan? Anybody? Okay. I also work with high school students, so I'm used to having conversations. So a couple of norms. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I may ask you questions. Unfortunately, I cannot see the small print on your name tag, so if I point you out, I would love for you to join the conversation. If you can be as present as possible, you will get as much of this conversation out of this conversation as we will. And then I'd love for this to be as actionable as possible. If there's something that you learned, at least one insight, one takeaway, think about how you can share it with someone else or apply it in your daily life. That's pretty much it. There's some other norms on the screen, but for the most part, let's just make it as fun as possible. So I want to actually kick it off by testing with Menti. So if you've used Menti before, post-pandemic, everybody knows about a QR code, but you could also just go to menti.com and enter the code 8839. And if the tech works out well, you should be able to answer the first question, which is kind of what is your level of experience with AI? The options are, what is AI? I've heard of it, or ChatGPT is my best friend, and I develop AI models. This is just a level set where we are, who's in the room. I can say that I fall in the category of ChatGPT and I are becoming really good friends. Although sometimes I don't think ChatGPT is always giving me the best answers. So by show of hands, has everybody got a chance to log their results? Yes? Okay. So most people have heard of it, which is good. Nobody has not heard of it, which is even better. We've got 2 people in the room who develop AI models. Who are those folks? Okay, what's your name? Alex? Yeah. Excellent. Who else? Kent and Alex. Do you want to trade places? Just joking. No, so Kent and Alex, this might be a little bit different of a framing for you, but again, we're not going to get into the technical aspects, but just to understand. For those that have used ChatGPT, what are some of the questions that you're asking ChatGPT? Sir, I don't know your name, but I'm going to volunteer you. What are some of the things that you've might have plugged into ChatGPT?
Richard James. I've asked ChatGPT just to give me feedback on like presentation, agenda setting, and admissions rubrics.
Okay.
Like that.
Excellent. There's a hand in the back.
I did research this summer, and I had to come up with a project idea. And at first, I was like, I didn't want to use ChatGPT because I was like, I'll figure it out on my own. And I was like, oh, maybe this will help me like develop an idea. Like I don't have to take the idea that they give me, but I can use that to like build it come up with my like idea.
Yep, that makes sense. Anyone else? Sir? Uh-huh. Okay, that's really helpful. So ChatGPT can be really, really helpful. I often use it just as like, if I don't have anybody to talk to bounce an idea off of, I'll say, what do you think about this? And ChatGPT is able to at least give me some sense of feedback. So what we're going to talk about today is maybe simplifying how we begin to think about AI. This very complex diagram comes from the World Economic Forum. And this is their framework for an inclusive AI lifecycle. When I looked at it, I spent about 5 to 6 minutes just trying to figure out what this meant. And I think that's kind of the problem when we talk about technology and innovation. If you're not an expert, sometimes it can be overwhelming. Anybody ever feel overwhelmed when you're thinking about AI? Especially with the news headlines. So my goal today is really to give you a couple of simple tools. If you care about equity, if you care about inclusion, if you care about perhaps the impacts of AI, some basic mental models to help you think a little bit deeper about the impact of this technology. And so for those that are not familiar, generative AI, and actually I could probably have you come up here and explain what generative AI is, but I wanted to give a very simple definition: input and output. That's probably the simplest way to explain it. When I was talking to my mom, I was like, how do you define generative AI? And she was like, I don't know, but I've heard of ChatGPT. I don't know what it does, but it's like magic. It's not actually magic. When we think about generative AI, it really refers to the capability to generate new or original content that is similar to what a human might produce. Essentially, it's more than just recognizing patterns. It is when you're able to put inputs into a deep learning model, and it will have a specific output that's human-like. And that's kind of the buzzword of what is the impact of generative AI on our jobs, in business, in education. And the question that I have for you before we dive into some of the opportunities is, what is one problem that you wish AI could solve? And I'll make sure I actually go change the screen for you guys. But just on Menti, if you still have it open, what is one problem that you wish AI could solve? And I will put our results up there. Think about it. Take 30 seconds. We're not rushed for time. What's one problem that you wish AI could solve? We'll give it another 30 seconds for folks to put in their responses of the one problem they wish AI could solve. And the great thing about Menti is it tells me how many people have voted vis-a-vis the number of people in the room. So we'll give it 10 more seconds. Give us one problem. It doesn't have to be a paragraph. It could just be one simple thing. Or maybe one problem that you're already solving with AI for those that are building these models. Let's have a volunteer. What's one problem that you wish AI could solve? Whew. Come to Miami. Okay, traffic. Why?
Well, I think, at least, and I'm transferring from New York, so it's really going to solve. But with the influx of folks who seem to have relocated to the metro area, the infrastructure, roads, highways, and such, has not been able to keep pace with that. And I think because of that, there's more accidents. In New York, there might be an accident with 1 or 2 cars. Here, it's 5 and a truck.
Yep.
So, those are things that I think would have a real impact on lives. I'm sure there's been fatalities in those accidents. Everything stops. So emergency vehicles can't get through. And if there was an emergency during the traffic jam, what would that be? So I think traffic is something, or infrastructure
Yep.
broadly is something.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I would love to hear from another person around a problem, is there are physical ways to solve for some of these challenges, like literally building new roadways or reimagining how we traverse our streets, or there might be technology ways to think about ways to be smarter. At the part of my role at the Innovation Authority is we work with different economic engines in our county to design public challenges, and we put a bit out there to the world for solutions. And I just was meeting with our Department of Transportation Director. Some of the things that they're using is AI to control traffic lights so that it's smarter based off of the time of the day and the flow of traffic. What's another problem that you wish AI could solve? Volunteers. What about the gentleman right in the front?
I was one of the 3 traffics.
Okay. Also traffic? Is traffic that bad in Atlanta?
I think it's because I said traffic this morning, and I was like, what's the most recent problem? And that was the first one.
Traffic. Okay. Who did not say, anybody that did not say traffic?
So I said writer's block, but
Ooh.
broadly, the way that I've used AI thus far has been basically to brainstorm things. And the only I think of in the future is just how much more you can push my creativity. Where you might sit on the idea for months, like I just can't crack this thought or can't think through this. By using AI, I can like spray that on and think of other things quicker than I even would.
Idea generator. Okay. Is it Brent? I can.
Brent, I have a good one.
Okay. Brent, tell us.
That we saw recently, so I'll redeem myself from traffic. So So walking him through how to convert the idea into a communication that a non-technical person could comprehend. And it made me wonder how many ideas are stuck behind a communication barrier that something like that could enable that person, or a language barrier.
Yep.
For that matter, right?
So we see language barriers, translation. There's a lot of things that AI can actually solve for. I saw this quote by Bill Gates, and I think AI has a role in everything. I think there's a lot of projections that say every single business, every single interaction that we have in the next, from now till forever, AI is going to play a role in it. And if you think about it, if you drove here today, and I use Apple Maps. Sometimes I think this works in Google Maps. It'll say, how about you take a different route? Or save 6 minutes if you avoid this. Or that's AI really embedded into the application, helping you improve the way you go about your life. And so Bill Gates has said the development of AI is as fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the internet, which I don't know about you, but the first thing I do when I wake up, which is not meditate, but it is actually to check my Instagram. It has changed the way that we interact, the way that we're going to interact with each other, and healthcare, travel, communication. It's fundamentally going to shift some things. So that really raises a question. Where are there opportunities? I asked ChatGPT, I had a list, but I was like, hey, ChatGPT, what are the opportunities in AI? And this is a list of 12 of like 19 that ChatGPT came up with. And if we can see the opportunities exist everywhere from healthcare to education, automation, transportation, financial services, the environment, if we think about the way in which we're able to monitor, predict, and identify opportunities to prevent environmental disasters, conservation even. The Nature Conservancy is using AI and kind of a sensor-based network to look at conservation challenges around water in different places. Agriculture, translation, accessibility, research, intelligence, security. AI has opportunities in pretty much every industry, in every aspect of our lives. But I think the broader question that we are all grappling with, and I know so many of the sessions at this convening are focused on, is, but what are the risks? What are some of the trade-offs? When we look at some of the risks of AI that are really penetrating some of the national conversation, they exist anywhere from bias, algorithmic bias, the way in which certain groups may receive either preferential treatment or be completely disregarded as a result of an input into some type of deep learning model. Exploitation. That's another one. There's a lot of conversation around labor exploitation, where large companies who want to ensure that the interfaces that are powered by AI don't have toxic content, that they're actually correct, that's outsourced. That's outsourced often to the developing world, where people make small sums of money but have to experience a lot of trauma to feed in negative and adverse data into a learning model so that it can be clean for us on the other end. Privacy. I'm a lawyer by trade, I mentioned. Privacy is huge. A lot of these learning models, whether or not it's purchased data or publicly available data that's scraped from the internet, have the capacity to potentially access personally identifiable information. Social security numbers, addresses, and triangulate that information. How are we able to keep our information private if everything is out there for the picking? Responsible use, beginning to think about the guideposts that we need to put into place to ensure that the social and legal and ethical considerations around AI are really well developed, and then we have some types of standards. Design. Does anybody use Duolingo? Any Duolingo use? I am on, if I check it right now, I think I'm on a 296-day streak on Duolingo. For those that are not familiar with Duolingo, it is an addicting language learning app. But one of the conversations that has come up at the FTC is the way in which we've designed some of these applications. I've paid for Duolingo, but if I didn't pay for it, if I I'm about to lose my streak. Duolingo would say, pay $10 to keep your streak? When those types of designs are put before children or vulnerable populations, it changes some of the motivations as to why we do what we do. Am I learning Duolingo to improve my French? Or am I doing it just to keep my streak up and to beat people on the leaderboard? These are some of the design considerations around AI. And finally, we think about displacement. Anybody heard any headlines about the number of jobs that may be displaced by automation and AI? McKinsey projects globally about 400 million to 800 million by 2030. It's a lot of people's jobs. It's a lot of opportunity for upskilling and reskilling, but that's a lot of jobs that may be displaced. And so these are some of the risks. The other point for consideration is, what are the guideposts that we need to put into place? Things like regulation, transparency, and accountability. To fully harness the power of AI, we have to look at both the opportunities and the potential risks and ensure we put some guideposts around it to protect people, particularly those that are not as conversant in what the impacts might be, or those who would otherwise be exploited or in marginalized communities. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is 3 shifts. That's it, just 3 shifts in our perspective around how we think about AI. And shift number 1 is to shift our perspective from wholesale adoption of AI as we receive it to looking at how we can adapt AI to the future that we want to see. That requires us to think about things like how much equity can be created by AI and how much AI might be creating more inequities. It requires us to look at the risks as well as those guideposts that I mentioned and others in how we use, implement, and embed AI into our organizations, into our day-to-day lives, into our communities, and into the culture at large. And so we have the opportunity to adopt it, or we can use our agency as individuals, as sentient beings, to really make it adaptive technology and not displace people wholesale. So that's the first shift that I want to talk about. The second shift is really around inclusion, and that was kind of the topic du jour, if you will. So the next question I have for you to kind of kick off our discussion is, what are some ways that AI can be more inclusive? And if you just joined and you can't quite see the QR code, you can go on your browser to menti.com and put in the code 88398772. So just take about 30 seconds and what is at least one way, or what are some ways that AI could be more inclusive? I feel like we need hype music for the times that you're thinking. We didn't set up the audio. Now I regret the answer to that question. Just take about 30 seconds, and we're going to mix it up in a second. But what are some ways that AI can be more inclusive? I'll drop some of the results up. Doesn't have to be, I always say, doesn't have to be a dissertation or a paragraph, but just a couple thoughts. What are some ways that AI can be more inclusive? All right, by show of hands, how many people are done? How many people are still working? Okay, the ones with their heads down. Okay, we'll give them another 10 seconds. So instead of me calling on you as individuals, I actually want you to get together and kind of like 2s or 3s for about a couple minutes. Just find 2 or 3 people and talk through some of the ways that you think that AI could be more inclusive. Ready, set, go. Just find, you can talk to new people. Just talk through what are some of the ways that AI can be more inclusive. appreciate you. Lo-fi beats. If one person is still talking, make sure you switch it up. We got about 60 seconds or so you got some time to get some final thoughts out. All right, all right. If you want to finish that last sentence and turn your attention, not on me necessarily. All right, how was that? Good? Much better than just hearing me talk, right? So let's share out. Like, I want to understand, what are some of the things that you all talked about? We have a bunch of different groups. We actually go through all the groups if we want to. I've been on this side of the room too much. I'm going to go, gentlemen, why don't you share with us? What are some of the ways that you think AI can be more inclusive?
Are we talking?
Yeah. No worries.
Well, I start off saying it has to be trained to be more inclusive, so it
Yep.
has to be trained on inclusive data sets. And for lack of a better term, I said hateful data sets need to be excluded.
So changing the inputs and having more inclusive data sets. Do you want to choose someone else? I'll give you, like, you get the power. Choose who do we want to hear from? Okay, well, someone else is. Okay, that little group. Okay, tell us, what are some of the ways?
I'm not too adverse in AI. I don't. I'm still learning. That's why I've gotten here. But what I'm trying to bring it to our my companies selfishly is to use it as a work. We have a big group of scholars in the world that are going to schedule and make it inclusive for them to, I guess, have this bot or have this AI pick and understand what their likes are. Like, what they want to do, so we can schedule them to certain different areas of the world or different projects.
So a custom application, so like an internally created learning model to help ensure that you are being empathetic, perhaps, and intentional about how you utilize and ask of people's time. Excellent. Do you want to choose someone else, or do you want me to do it? Okay, what about... Oui, c'est vrai.
So, we were basically debating the inclusivity aspect of AI in the K-12. And it's to make it more equitable in the sense that you have different levels of AI, right? People come forward as AI services, some are free, but they have also innovation that have more competencies, that of course. What does it mean now to have students having access to AI tools and equity, but some because of their social needs, have access only to better AI. But now all of us can just pay the 20 bucks or $100 a month for access to more advanced AI. How do we afford
I think you hit on an important point, and there's going to be an example in a moment of how AI is being used in education in a really interesting way. So something I do, in addition to my J job, I have a nonprofit where we help coach kids to get into college, students from underrepresented backgrounds. About 40% of students from underrepresented backgrounds in the US do not make it to college. And it's a lot because they may not have access to college counselors, they may not have the dollars to pay private coaches, and so we created a platform that has on-demand coaching. Helped unlock about $26 million worth of scholarships. And the kids that I coach right now, they are wondering how can AI level the playing field for them. They're often at schools where they don't have a counselor to review their essay. And I've said, okay, use my content, make sure you write a great essay, but drop that essay into ChatGPT and get some feedback on ways that you might improve it. Or make sure you use something like Grammarly to ensure that you're not getting deducted points on your scholarship applications because you may not have someone to proofread at home for you. And so to your point, there's a lot of ways that if we're intentional about how we think about the purpose of the AI, it can actually close gaps rather than expand them. I think that's a great one. Let's hear from a couple other people.
So I have a challenge with thinking about have a kid dropping their essay into ChatGPT to give them feedback because it kind of goes back to the whole bias thing. And so if I am a kid in an underrepresented community, a rural community or something, and I am telling my story, right? And I tell my story. Grammarly is fine. That's grammar. But I say, okay, let me see what ChatGPT thinks about it. And I drop my story into it, but based on the algorithm, this gives me back feedback that really doesn't convey what my story is. So I think that's kind of the dilemma
Yep.
around bias and inclusiveness we were just talking in our group about. So there's a lot of discussion about this, right? How do you undo the bias? How do you undo the algorithms that are already there? So I'm not asking you, is that
I think we have our two friends that are building models, and then your friend right behind you that says we got to change the inputs. I think that's great, is understanding the limits of what the technology can and should be doing vis-a-vis the additional supports that we need to put in place to make sure that you get the most efficacy from that interaction. Let's hear from at least two other groups of folks. Any volunteers? What about you right in the back? Yes, yeah. Yes.
so what I said, actually, and what everybody said, is similar to the gentleman from the input. So in terms of the development, the testing of the language models and algorithms themselves, make sure that there's diverse people
Yep.
that are developing them, and then also the testing. I think that's really important to make sure that models are tested with diverse circumstances.
Yep.
And with diverse models.
So expanding that idea that not just the input, but also when we're testing it, we need to make sure we've got a broader, more inclusive pool that's testing these algorithms. Let's hear from a last group for this question. Any volunteers? All right.
Thanks so much. I think in our conversation, we discussed that the actual design and implementation teams be the versions themselves. There's a lot of focus, of course, with the data and the outputs, but one of the additional components of design and they've been able to bring in our own life experiences, cultures, and our originality in the components of our design. We would have a little bit more control towards limiting the design.
Yeah, so it's this alliteration of P's, if you will. We've got the platform, we've got the process, and we also have the people that are behind this whole development that we have to think about having more an inclusive lens. So a couple thoughts that I had. This is one quote that I saw that I thought was really helpful, is that algorithms are animated by data. Data comes from people. People make up society, and society is unequal. And it was just an interesting way of framing it because sometimes we don't go to multiple layers or get to kind of the root cause of where we actually see the outcomes that we experience. And so never forgetting that technology and tools technology is a tool. Innovation is a process. But there are other more humanistic layers to that we cannot lose sight of if we're going to think about making sure equity, inclusion, access, opportunity, these important principles and values are embedded into this work so that we see much more inclusive outcomes. So a couple things that I wanted to share were some examples that I'm really excited about. To the question about education, there's an episode of How I Built This. If any podcast junkies, fans? Okay. I'm obsessed with podcasts. I have a podcast. But one of the podcasts that I listen to is How I Built This, hosted by Guy Raz, and he kind of goes behind the story of some of the biggest brands and companies. He's interviewed Sal Khan of Khan Academy before, but he recently had an update conversation, and Sal told the story of how Sam Altman called him and said, hey, we're going to release this thing called ChatGTV. This was before it came to the world. Do you guys want to play around and build something in it that could be embedded into Khan Academy? And his team went back and forth, the same questions, whether or not AI could be helpful or hurtful. But ultimately, what they built was Khan Miga, which they actually just released. And this is an AI-powered guide that provides individualized tutoring for learners. And when we think about communities where there's no access, either financially or with the types of people support to tutoring, this could be a stopgap that can help level the playing field to make sure there's additional support. And it also provides learning support for teachers to make sure that the experience can be customized for the student and it's not just a one-size-fits-all. And so Khan Academy is doing some really interesting things with AI embedded into their platform rather than just saying, we'll leave AI over there and we'll keep teaching kids basics. Another cool startup that I actually just met this past week that I was fascinated with is a startup called SignSpeaks. Now, it is a 3-member founding team. One person is deaf, and another person, English is her second language. And so what SignSpeaks has been able to do is they have developed a platform that leverages machine learning powered by a proprietary language software that recognizes sign language, American Sign Language, and translates it into spoken word and then creates an avatar so that if you are speaking, it will do real-time translation for someone that has ASL. And if someone is signing an ASL, it will do real-time translation into spoken word back. And if you think about it, there's so many interactions day to day where if you are hearing impaired or if you have some type of accessibility challenge, we haven't yet gotten to the place where we can have seamless communications. So things like SignSpeak, I'm really excited about this startup personally, are bridging that gap. They're creating more equity, they're creating more inclusion, and they're using AI and machine learning to do it. Another interesting company to the point around the ethics of data or data sovereignty. Who owns the data? Can we just scrape data from the internet? Is a company called Streamalytics. They've recently made a bit of a pivot, but I think their underlying thesis is really, really interesting. My friend's actually the founder. And basically what they were able to do is they're able to provide high quality training data, I think to the point that the gentleman mentioned earlier, through an opt-in, ethically sourced process. And so everyday consumers are able to sell their data individually to companies through this Streamalytics platform. And they processed, I think by 2021, they had processed 10 billion data points that they then were able to clean up and then resell to folks that needed training data, but also pay end consumers back for their habits. And these are the types of startups, technology companies, ideas that address some of the risks that we talked about. Oftentimes data is just collected from the internet, and the people that put the underlying information out there don't get compensated. Streamalytics wanted to change that, particularly focused on marginalized communities. So shift number 2, moving from excluding to including. So AI can be used as a tool of exclusion or inclusion if we fail to consider the legal, the ethical, or social implications of this transformative technology. And it doesn't take much, I think you guys have seen, just by our conversation, to start to talk about how we might make AI more inclusive. The reason why I wanted us to be interactive is for you to understand you don't necessarily have to have a PhD, but if you do, it really helps. But you don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to be, in government, a policymaker. You don't have to be a lead person at the FTC or the FCC, for example. Everyday people can begin to have these conversations that help push the needle a little bit further. Even if it's in the microcosm of your organizations, to your example of how are we using AI to have more empathetic scheduling, part of the conversation could be, if we have a globally distributed team, are we thinking about different religious holidays? Are we thinking about different days of the week? I know when I've spent time in the Middle East, there are some days that you'd work on a Sunday, whereas here in the United States, Sunday's often more of a quieter day. And so those types of conversations is how we begin to start the process of making the changes to the inputs, the outputs, the process, the people, to have better outcomes that are more inclusive. And so shift number 3 kind of starts with a model that I've been thinking about for the last 8 years. A little bit of a story. When I first left the practice of law and I moved into tech, my job was to launch and lead something called the Venture Cafe. And it essentially is an organization, they have a couple of them around the world, that is designed to make tech communities more inclusive, accessible, and better connected through programming, events. We hosted a gathering 49 weeks a year that attracted about 500 people a week, free beer and wine. I think that was the biggest carrot, but we had workshops, and we were able to serve 55,000 people from across the South Florida area over a 5-year period, represented by over 70% people of color, over 50% women, and probably the most diverse distribution of zip codes you'd ever see. Young, old, VCs, high school students, everybody was coming together just to understand what technology is, how to connect with opportunities, and to learn. And one of the things that I discovered was people didn't call themselves innovators, yet they were doing the most innovative things, starting companies, coming up with new solutions. And we as a team began to gather data and look at some of the patterns, and we realized that the number one threshold to people innovating or thinking differently is their ability to identify as such. So I came up with this framework called innovation currency, which basically identifies different styles of how you innovate. One is a disruptive style or disruptor, and these people have kind of the power to change how we see physical and cultural societal systems. It's all about systems. These are the systems thinkers. I'm definitely a bit of a disruptor. I'll show you my results from this quiz in a moment. Then there's connectors, and you probably all know connectors. These are people that help us reimagine the way that we relate to each other as people. They're able to think about the ways, I think to your point earlier, of how we remove barriers of bias and privilege from interpersonal interactions. They're always thinking about ways to do that. Then we have distributors. Distributors are folks that are here to create new ways of thinking about value, how we determine the worth of something, how we assess the value of something, and they easily remove the barriers of access to resources, capital, and opportunity. And finally, there's the influencer style. And I'm not talking about Instagram or anybody on TikTok? No, I'm not on TikTok. I've actually never done it. I am on Snapchat, but these are not the social media influencers. We're talking a couple layers deeper than this. And influencers are people that inherently understand power, how power operates, how we wield it, both on the individual level, institutional level, and collectively in society. They're kind of reimagining how power is distributed and how we can kind of build these movements around shifting how power operates. And so, quick question, which one do you think you are as an individual? I'll go ahead and advance the slide. if you had to choose, based off of that description, which one do you think you are? And I'll go ahead and put the description back on the screen just for a point of reference. Are you a distributor? Are you a disruptor? Connector? Influencer? Which one do you think you are? Just take, this should be like wild guess, 10 seconds. Okay, all right, everything's moving. By show of hands, how many people have submitted their answer? Okay, we have a couple other folks. How many people think that they are disruptors? Only 2? Only 2 disruptors? Okay, I will join you. I'm definitely a disruptor. How many people think they're connectors? Okay, the majority of people, you love people. I'm actually not an extrovert. I'm kind of an ambivert, mostly an introvert, so I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a connector. Okay, distributors. How many people are always thinking about real account? Just like you were helping your mom, okay? And influencers. Okay. It's kind of a trick question, because the way it works is, if you want to learn a little bit more, I have a quiz. You can do the full quiz on my website. But really, these are my results. You're a little bit of everything. Ideally, you're a little bit of everything, but different distributions. As you can see, I'm very much a disruptor, and I've taken this quiz probably about 20 times, and every single time, my number 1 is disruptor, and I created it. So there's a little bit of bias in it, and my number 2 is connector. You can take the quiz if you want, just to understand what your distribution looks like, but it's a trick question. It's not binary. You're not one. You have elements of many of them, more likely than not, and you often have a dominant and a secondary. And the reason why I wanted to introduce this framework to you all is to give you a way of beginning to think about what I think is the true power of AI. We talked at the top of our conversation about some of the industries or practical applications of AI. Then we began to get a little bit deeper into some of the problems that we wanted to solve, how we individually are beginning to think about the ways that AI can be more inclusive. And I want to have you think about now, how do we begin to understand how AI interacts with some larger concepts? So disruptors care about systems. If we think about systems, we can ask ourselves, or we can ask a group, we can ask our organizations, in what ways does AI reinforce or uphold existing social systems? We can think about AI as just a process, or we can think about the purpose of this innovation. And personally, I think that the definition of innovation, if you look in the dictionary, is just the process of creating something new. It comes from the 2 Latin root words that come together, in and novus, into new. That's it. It's not that complicated. That's innovation, anything new. And we see new things come through generative AI. But oftentimes we focus so much on the process and the technology without understanding what's the purpose. Personally, I think that the purpose of innovation is to improve the human condition. What good would innovation be if it wasn't to improve why we're here, how we relate to each other, how we build different societies and cultures, and how we lift other people up who haven't had access? And so these sets of questions kind of correspond to each of the innovator styles. Now, if you think, for the 3 of us that are disruptors in the room, the question that we might be thinking about is, in what ways does AI reinforce or uphold existing systems? In what ways is AI perpetuating biases that exist, perpetuating systemic inequities that exist, or can we use it to disrupt those things? There's a court case that I read about where the issue was whether or not landlords who used this software, this machine learning software to screen tenants, violated HUD's anti-discrimination requirements in housing because they were disproportionately screening out black and brown tenants, because the algorithm just said, well, maybe if you've had a criminal record or maybe if we found something online, you're not eligible for housing. And that was one of the questions that the court was examining in, I think it was Maryland. That's a bigger question. How is AI upholding discrimination, or can it be used to disrupt discrimination? Connectors. How many connectors do we have? Or people that believe they're all connectors? Connectors care about trust. Trust is the currency. It is the speed at which business moves, and it's the currency of connection. And when we think about AI, one of the questions we can ask is, in what ways does AI change how we connect and relate to each other? Are we able to use AI to break down the disconnects? Or are we able to use AI to create more distance? We have so many challenges, and I'm not going to get political, but we have so many challenges in society right now where we have epidemics of loneliness, where people don't speak to each other because they're heads down in their phones. Is there a way for us to use these new innovations like AI and machine learning to actually help us build deeper human connections? That's an opportunity. For those, I think there was like maybe a couple of distributors in the room, and I think when you take the test, you might see you have some of those elements. How can AI create more access? The gentleman talked about how are we thinking about AI in education? Can we use AI the same way that Sal Khan is using it to create more access for students that don't have the financial means, for families that don't have kind of the supports? Or will we use AI as a tool to create more haves and have-nots? And finally, for the influencers, I think there are about 3 of you, one of the questions that you can ask, and this is open to all of you, is who does AI empower? Who does AI disempower? These are not the questions that you will read in your textbooks, but I think these are the questions that should be at the center of any innovation, particularly something as powerful as AI. Who is empowered by this technology? And by extension, who is disempowered by the technology? These are some critical questions that, and I can make this available to, I can make these slides available to all of you, but these are some critical questions that I thought about when I was thinking through the innovator styles, when I was thinking about how do we build capacity as leaders, as CEOs, as researchers, as students, as parents, as informed and engaged citizens. How do we begin to ask better questions to achieve better outcomes? That's the same process we talked about. Input, output. Let's change the inputs of the questions we're asking to receive better outputs in the way that we use the technology. And finally, this is my favorite quote in the entire world. We either live by intention or we exist by default. What I would like to leave you with is this idea that we can live by intention in how we interact with things that are AI-driven or AI-powered, how we begin to implement it in our day-to-day lives, or it's just going to exist by default. Either way, we're making a choice. And what choice will you make? So the final shift is from process to purpose, and I kind of talked about this a moment ago, is AI could just be a process that runs in the background of our day-to-day lives, or we could think about the purpose of this innovation, which is to improve the human condition. These 3 shifts, we'll go back. These 3 shifts are thinking about adaptive AI, inclusive AI, and purposeful AI. A couple of concepts to take with you to integrate in the way that you interact with it. So my last question is, what are you going to take from it? What are you going to take from our conversation? Take the 30 seconds. We have a couple minutes left. Take 30 seconds. What's one thing that stood out? What's one thing that you'll take away from our conversation? I have like 10 things, but I'll just stick with writing one down. So just take 30 seconds and put in one thing that you'll take away from this conversation, an idea that was sparked, a question that you want to keep thinking about. Take another 15 seconds if you're still writing. What's your one takeaway? We talked about a lot, but if you only take one thing, I'm happy with that. Ten seconds to get your last couple of words in. All right, as folks are putting in, let's hear from 3 people. Do we have 3 voluntold or volunteers? You laughed, so why don't you? What's one takeaway you have from today?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I entered responsibility around empowerment and disempowerment with AI, and in particular the last couple of statements you made around whether we're upholding any kind of biases or able to address them. So,
Excellent. So, who else? What about this gentleman in this really great blazer? You've been smiling. What's one takeaway?
Also, the disempowerment, and I'm wondering what background I bring that might make me blind to ideas.
Yep. That's a whole nother presentation. But
I'd love to see it.
but if you've got Wikipedia, just search Cognitive Bias Codex. If you've never seen the Cognitive Bias Codex, for me, it makes me realize that our brains are just computers. We all have biases. They're like pronouns. We all have them. And so then when we remove our shame and blame and guilt from the conversation around bias, then that's an opportunity, like what you just said so eloquently, is to see where I might be operating in bias and how I approach something. But I think that's brilliant. Let's hear from one last person. Cognitive Bias Codex. And there's also a really good book, The Art of Thinking Clearly, which is really a great book on bias. You've been nodding your head. Give us one takeaway.
I did a little bit later, but I definitely, the person wrote focus on purpose of AI, focus on purpose of AI rather than just conclusions. So it's be intentional about what you're doing with AI rather than just oh, let me just use ChatGTV.
Exactly. Living by intention or existing by default. So using these technologies very intentionally is going to allow us to unlock the full power of them. I think we're out of time. Yeah, we're exactly out of time. So thank you. Thank you for everybody that participated. Thank you to you, because this was not just me. This is all of us. Let's give ourselves a hand. And if you want a copy of these slides, just ping me. This is how you can get in touch with me. I'm happy to share them. And I hope that everybody had at least one valuable takeaway from this conversation, and I'm happy to chat afterwards. So thank you.